Hey there, and welcome back to Tax Fun with Taxium, where taxes meet clarity and maybe even a little fun. I'm your host, Amanda, and today we're diving into a critical trio of topics that every business dealing with state taxes should know: registrations, backfiling, and voluntary disclosure agreements, or VDAs. Each one sounds more exciting than the last, right? All right, maybe not exciting, but I promise understanding them could save your business a serious headache and maybe even some serious money. So let's go step by step for each one. We're going to break it down as what it is, when to do it, what to be careful of. So let's get it started. How are you doing today, Ronald?
Awesome. Always so impressed hearing you talk about all this stuff and doing the podcast. So I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm glad to hear it. I'm living the dream at the moment.
Is it your dream or somebody else's dream?
It's probably someone else's.
That's what most of us are doing. But, hang in there. We'll make it our dream.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you've queued up a fun topic for us today. This is definitely super important. A business's journey into sales tax starts with understanding, taking a step back and looking at the information. But then their first real action is what we're going to talk about today. It's the registration and all this kind of stuff. So glad we're talking about this.
Yeah. So you want to just hop right into it and tell us what it is to register?
Yeah. What is registration? That's basically just a business raising their hand to the state saying, hey, we're now going to be officially conducting business in your state. That's just you notifying the state that you're here and doing stuff in their playground.
Yeah.
And then as far, what's the next one? Backfiling. What's backfiling? Backfiling is done after registration. And that's when a business will either file for the first time a return they should have filed in the past, or if they filed it incorrectly and need to change it, they can backfile or amend it to correct a previously done filing. Now, one for you. What's a voluntary disclosure?
All right. So voluntary disclosure is where you should have been registered, but you didn't for whatever reason. And you go to the state voluntarily and tell them, hey, we know we should have registered. We're trying to make it right now. Typically, voluntary disclosures are, after a year or two of having supposed to have been registered, but not going through with it. And they do come with penalty abatement.
No, don't get ahead of us. Okay. That's perfect, though. So basically, voluntary disclosure is just a company raising their hand to the state saying, we should have done things accurately. We didn't. Now we're fessing up.
Yeah.
Is that a good summary?
It's a great summary.
Okay. What's next on our breakdown of this?
So when should you register?
When to do it. Okay. A company should register when they hit Nexus.
Okay.
That's the short answer, is you should know whatever state's rules we're talking about where you're doing business, and you should register whenever their rules tell you should register. And that's going to vary by state, but that's the short answer.
Yeah. And typically you would register when you open an office, hire an employee, or if you've just made the sales nexus, if you've hit those economic thresholds. Thanks, for your decision.
Yeah, well, love that word from last week's episode, Nexus. But yeah, you should register when you hit Nexus. And when you hit Nexus could depends on a couple different factors. It could be sales, like Amanda just said. It could be because of physical presence. It could be because of an affiliate relationship, marketplace Nexus, click-through Nexus. Whenever you hit Nexus is when you should get registered.
Absolutely. And here's the trap. When you register too soon, you can cause a backfiling requirement, which we'll get to next. Registering too late could trigger penalties and interest. If you've had Nexus for a while but haven't registered yet, that can contribute to those penalties and interest. But you don't want to register right away either. You might want to consider a voluntary disclosure agreement instead once, we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, for sure. So that was registration. So when should folks do backfiling?
Typically you backfile when you realize that you should have been filing sales tax returns, as you said before, if it's the original return, or if, your customer gave you an exemption certificate 2 months later and you need to amend what you originally filed with the state. It often comes after registration or when you're preparing for a state audit. It can also sometimes be required if you register after a state catches you.
So with backfiling, yeah, it's just a correction of a historical event or filing a historical event for the first time. And when they would need to do it is basically when either they recognize a mistake was made or when the state tells them, hey, this is wrong, go fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. And backfiling without a VDA means that you're likely on the hook for full penalties and interest. States don't typically give you credit for being honest unless you're also going through their disclosure program. Also, if you file old returns that do show a liability, that might flag you for an audit. So if you've got significant exposure, don't just backfile casually. Look into the VDAs first.
Definitely, that's a good point. Yeah, before people take any big action, go talk to the experts. Figure out what the best, most cost-effective, least exposure route is before just picking one. Because a lot of these cases, once you pick an action, there's no going back to pick a different action.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in that case, when is the best time to do a VDA?
After you have conducted an analysis. Right. So there's no simple answer to this, but the answer is the same in that you need to look at the data and that's going to tell you what to do. Because VDAs, there's normally a cost to doing them. And that could be a cost of internal employees taking the 4 months to manage this project. That could be the cost of paying an outside consultant to do the VDAs for you. But there's going to be a cost on what you owe the state as well. Some of those penalties, fines. So you want to kind of look at holistically, what do we owe where? What are we liable for? Is it worth it to just eat the fine and do the backfiling? Or do we pay the outside consultant to handle the full VDA project because it's going to save us 50 grand in penalties and fines? So, when to do it is more a function of cost than is anything else. Because if the goal is to keep it clean, that's great. There's multiple avenues to clean compliance. But, VDAs should be kind of led by the cost factor.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you should note as well is if the state finds you first, that VDA option is off the table. The whole point of that voluntary disclosure agreement is that it's voluntary. So if the state comes to you and says, hey, we think you should have registered, there's no more penalty abatement.
Yeah, we've talked to lots of business owners who, want to roll the dice. And making an informed decision, a calculated risk is one thing, but not knowing all the data behind it and then just rolling the dice is something different. So if people looked at their books and said, hey, we've got $5 grand in liability or something, we're just going to not do it this time. Sure, that's not what the state wants you to do, but at least you have an understanding of the risk behind it versus not looking closely, not realizing you have $250,000 and exposure, rolling the dice, and then a year or two later you get audited. Now you owe the state millions because all the filings and penalties that have snowballed.
Yeah.
Like we've seen all kinds of crazy stuff, which we'll talk about some stories here in a second. So what's the next? What do we be careful of? What to be careful of?
With voluntary disclosure agreements or VDAs, really what you want to be careful of is the timing. If you know that that's a pain point, it's better to get ahead of it before the state contacts you, as we've said before. Another thing to keep in mind is that some states don't offer a VDA for every tax type, or they might even have quirks in the process. I have seen multiple times that people were kicked out of that VDA option due to either having employees in the state or property, various reasons that state would then not accept that VDA.
For sure. Yeah, go into a VDA eyes wide open. Make sure your stuff is ready to be looked at by the state, because while they're happy you're raising your hand and fessing up and you're voluntarily giving them whatever you owe them, at the same time, you're also telling them we've been doing things wrong. Right. So you don't want to give them any more reason to be scrupulous in their dealings with you, or to be digging into your stuff than you need to. Just make sure that, when you go in, things are good, things are clean. You can explain all the things and, everything makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So
like we talked about before, with the VDAs, once a company gets registered, you lose the ability to do a voluntary disclosure. So you really want to, again, take a step back and look at holistically what's the best option, because once you choose to do something, you can't always go back and then choose a different route. If you found out that doing a VDA could have saved you 10 grand or something,
Hmm.
just be sure that you have a good understanding before taking any action.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say personally, I've seen a lot of customers back out of the VDAs because of the price point. But as you stated, there's going to be a cost associated no
Mm-hmm.
matter how they go about it. So while the VDA on its own may have a cost to it, that does come with that penalty abatement for those states that accept it. Uh, but if you were to just register and backfile for every past period, that's going to come with,
Mm-hmm.
time, money, energy.
For
So
sure. For
it's
sure.
really the pros and cons.
For sure. Yeah, gotta weigh those yeah, exactly, those benefits, those risks and the costs. And without that full deep analysis and including the cost of an employee's time to spend 5, 10, 15 hours a week doing this, all those things matter.
Hmm.
So what should folks be careful of when it comes to a backfiling?
Didn't we go over that?
No, I think we skipped over registration and backfiling for this last part.
uh, yeah, I mean, to be careful of backfiling, that you could be on the hook for the penalties and interest. So keep that in mind, depending on how
Mm-hmm.
far in the future that you're backfiling those returns for. Um,
So far in the past.
or that's how far in the past. It's
we're
recorded.
living,
You know that.
yeah, we're living in the past and the future at the same time. It's
Oh
all
yeah.
fine.
Yeah, and another thing to be careful of it when it comes to backfiling, like I said before, is that it could potentially flag you for an audit. So the state may look a little closer to your business there. If you're filing all of your returns all at the same time, it can definitely trigger
Mm-hmm.
that second review.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Yeah, and I would say that the thing to be most aware of along with that is like the accuracy, because when you filed it the first time, the state's expectation is you did the filing correctly,
Right.
right? So when you go to fix it, they have some grace and understanding. Things happen, but you want to make sure that fix is double accurate, you know, because you're basically just saying, hey, I messed up the first time.
Hmm.
But yeah, just make sure that, everything's ultra clean in case you do get a couple questions, which, we handle a lot of filings for our clients and stuff, and we have to do a bunch of back filings. How often have we seen a message come through Washington's portal from one of the state people there saying, hey, I have a question about this period, this filing, and why you're changing it?
Right.
You know, and thankfully we have good explanations as to why, but again, something not to do willy-nilly. Just be sure, things are clean, that you can confidently answer them as to why it changed and why there's a difference in dollars one way or the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll take the last one, which is folks be careful of during registration. Same answer in a way, the accuracy, because you're filling out a legal form to a state government. So that in of itself should give you a little bit of pause to make sure that every single field is supremely accurate. Because if stuff hits the fan, they're going to go and see the first checkpoint is who filled this out, who registered the state. Was it Amanda? Was it Ronald? Was it RJ? Was it Brittany? Great. Why'd you tell us that you're only doing $100,000 in sales when you did the first filing and we're seeing $5 million in sales in month one?
Right.
Why'd you tell us you started business January 1st of 2025 when my daughter bought your makeup product in March of 2024 at a local CVS? Which that sounds ridiculous, but that story literally happened to one of my clients at a point where they got audited because the auditor's kid randomly bought this product. Papa Auditor was like, never heard of this brand. I'm going to go check to see if they've registered for sales tax. Sure enough, they hadn't. Boom, here comes the audit.
Mm-hmm.
So, on that registration, just make sure that it represents the best bet is make it represent exactly the truth. Even if it costs you money and fines and backfilings, always better to have it be spotty clean than to roll the dice and have that piper come to get paid.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. For some reason, I would say about a year or two ago, we were seeing a lot of registrations with an influx of being registered as C Corps or charitable organizations rather
Mm-hmm.
than retail locations. And that is a
Mm-hmm.
mess to unwind.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. And, when people get registered, depending on the business type, the location, they may be automatically forced to register for something like franchise tax as well, depending
Hmm.
on their business type. So, to your point, folks will try and finagle some of that stuff. Oh, we're going to do sales tax. But I'm going to change my registration, my business type to this, so I don't get forced to do franchise tax or B&O or something else. But, you know, it's a risky game to play, and the best bet is just keep it clean. It's not worth the giant headache that's going to come. It's not worth your job as an individual. It's not worth the company's equity and reputation as a company owner. Just get it done right and keep them happy and move on.
Yeah, it's not worth the jail time that may come with it.
Hopefully not. But I mean, we've seen them do some crazy stuff, like we talked
Mm,
about last week. They're suing individuals for businesses not paying sales tax, not just the businesses. So they're
right.
holding people personally responsible for this because states need the revenue.
Yeah, and the line "it's above my pay grade" doesn't count
Yeah,
here.
for sure. For sure. So, I mean, we kind of covered some of this, but any other, myths, misconceptions, pitfalls, stories you want to share?
I know we teased a little bit about registrations in our Nexus episode. Voluntary disclosure is definitely something that people should be on more people's radar. It absolutely can help. Personally, I would say I had one client who they switched over their CFO, and the new CFO came
Mm-hmm.
in. We had a meeting. She said, "We think that our sales tax might be a mess. What can you do to help?" They ended up needing 23 voluntary disclosure agreements because
Mm-hmm.
their Nexus had gone back like 5, 6, 7 years, and they
Mm-hmm.
didn't do anything with it, didn't register, and ended up being a multi-million-dollar
Mm-hmm.
tax
Yeah.
amount. Because you'll have to go back historically. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
one more thing to note on that voluntary disclosure is that look back period is only 4 years rather than historic. So if the state does contact you for uh, the need to register, that they think that you should have been registered, they will go back to the history of your business. Whereas if you get ahead of it and you do that voluntary disclosure, it's only a 4-year look back period.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that potentially can save you so much just
Mm-hmm. For sure.
anything for
Which,
those 4 years.
most people not working in sales tax specifically wouldn't know that, but, all the more reason to go talk to people. Don't make decisions in a vacuum, because
Yeah,
there's savings and efficiencies out there that people like Amanda, myself, tons of other businesses, softwares, and consultants can help you, realize.
absolutely. How many people do you think wake up every morning thinking about sales tax like we do, Ronald?
More than we think, unfortunately. It's like at every company, it's at least a couple people should be at least the accounting person, maybe the executive over finance, and probably the CFO or CEO too,
Mhm.
because these things impact an organization's ability to grow, to scale. Speaking of horror stories, I work with the CEO early in my Avalar, I'm sorry, CFO, and early in my Avalara days, who inherited a mess from the prior CFO who got fired for not doing sales tax right. And so at the time the prior CFO got fired, they owed around $50,000 in sales tax that they didn't want to deal with because they were still growing.
Mhm.
CFO2 comes in. That's now, because of penalties, fines, and everything snowballing, now that's $150,000. And so I was talking to them, are y'all going to take care of this now? You saw your person to get fired. Well, I don't want to have to go to the CEO and the board and ask for 6 figures to pay this. So I don't know what to do. I'm just going to roll the dice, right? Basically. So 6 months goes by, they end up getting fired.
Mhm.
CFO3 comes in about a year later. So this is, I think, I was with them for 3 years, happened across about 3 years. So by about year three, they did have an appetite to get it cleaned up. They're growing, they're talking about getting acquired, this and that. And so they had to go look at their books. Like, all right, man, let's go get this cleaned up. What's it going to cost? And so we did the analysis. It went from 50 to 150. Now it's almost 350. you
Mhm.
know what they could have fixed for 50 grand in year one was going to cost them 350,000 plus a whole lot more in service cost from the vendors to support the project. And it's like, man, this thing costs 8x what it should just because somebody didn't want to go have a difficult, candid conversation. You know,
Yes.
and so, folks just gotta, it's tough, it's a lot to deal with, but just make sure that, you're doing everything you can, because if your name's involved with this stuff, you don't want that to roll downhill and fall on your shoulders.
Absolutely.
Ooh, that's a lot. So what do we got coming up over next week or next time?
Well, we have lots in the works for next time and the time after that.
Are we going to get the tariffs next time, you think? Maybe?
Well, you're going to tease it. Next week, we have a special guest to come on and talk to us about tariffs and how much fun that will be.
Yeah, and while Amanda and I do know a lot, enough about a lot, we're not experts on everything about everything. So as we encourage y'all to do with seeking outside help and expertise when you don't know something, we're going to bring in some folks throughout these conversations who have really deep knowledge in specific areas, and we're hoping that y'all find some value in that.
Absolutely. I feel like this ended up being a lot more of a heavier conversation.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, this is really the start of people's journeys. They should be aware of kind of, once you open that gate and walk to the playground, what does it mean? Where does it go?
Yeah.
Actually, I think I'm glad we're talking about tariffs just because of, the times we're living in. But probably after that, we should talk about, once you've registered, then how do you actually assess tax?
Right.
Because everybody has to assess tax, whether the thing is taxable or not. But we'll get more into that. But yeah, everything's a lot to deal with.
Absolutely. All right. So to bring it back down, I have a joke for you.
Okay.
Okay. Why did the business bring a ladder to the tax office?
Why?
Because it heard it had high nexus and needed to register for it. But once it saw the backfiling, it wanted to voluntarily disappear instead of disclose.
Wow. That was like 4 jokes in one.
Had to fit it all in there.
That was great. Amazing. Make my head explode.
So to wrap it up, registration is your entry point, but only do it when you're sure that it's the right time. Backfiling is how you fix past mistakes, but can come with costs if done outside of a program. VDAs are your get out of jail almost free card if you act fast and smart. If this episode brought up more questions than answers, don't worry. That's what Tax Fun with TaxSam is here for. Reach out and let us help you figure out your best move. Until next time, keep calm and tax on.
Thanks, everybody. Catch y'all later.
Bye.